I thought losing the house would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. It turned out to be the day I finally stopped being everyone else's safety net and started building my own life. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when the email came through. I'd been sitting at my desk at the design agency, pretending to concentrate on a rebrand project while secretly refreshing my inbox every 10 minutes. The pre-approval letter from the lender was supposed to arrive that week. I'd been saving for 3 years, cutting back on everything, taking freelance projects on weekends, skipping trips and concerts and dinners out, all of it funneled into a down payment fund for a small craftsman bungalow in the Oakwood neighborhood of Raleigh. I'd toured the house twice. I knew every inch of it. The original hardwood floors, the clawfoot tub, the big magnolia tree in the backyard that would bloom every April. I had a photo of it as my phone wallpaper. The email came. I clicked on it without breathing. Application status, denied. I read the reason 3 times before it made any sense. Insufficient creditworthiness. Debt-to-income ratio exceeds threshold. Outstanding balance across 4 accounts, $23,400. I didn't have 4 credit card accounts. I had one. The balance was $340. My hands went cold. I pulled up my credit report right there at my desk, the one I'd last checked 6 months ago when everything was perfectly fine, and stared at a page I didn't recognize. 4 credit cards opened over the past 2 years. A personal loan from an online lender. Balances racked up at electronics stores, a recording equipment retailer in Charlotte, a music production software company. Minimum payments missed for months on 2 of them. Every account had been opened with my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's address. I sat very still for a long time. My coworker Marcus walked by my desk, said something about the coffee being fresh, and I nodded like a normal person, while my entire world tilted sideways. I knew, before I made a single phone call, exactly where the money had gone. I'd watched it disappearing for 2 years without ever seeing it clearly. My brother had been recording an album in a professional studio in Charlotte. He'd been buying mixing equipment, software subscriptions, studio time at $200 an hour. My mother had been posting about it on Facebook with the kind of pride usually reserved for moon landings. My son is going to make it. He just needs the right opportunity. Some people don't believe in him, but I do. I had smiled at those posts like an idiot. I had even shared one of them. My brother was 31 years old and had never held a job for more than 4 months. My mother had spent my entire life explaining this away. He's sensitive, he's creative, he needs support, not pressure. The world doesn't understand him yet. And I had needed to believe those explanations because the alternative, that she was choosing him over me, again and again and again, was something I wasn't ready to accept. I was ready now. I drove to my mother's house that evening straight from work, still in my blazer, my laptop bag in the back seat. I hadn't called ahead. My mother was in the kitchen making pasta when I walked in, and she turned from the stove with a smile that faded the moment she saw my face. "Mom," I set the printed credit report on the kitchen table between us. "I need you to explain these." She looked at the papers without touching them. The color drained from her face in a way that told me everything before she said a single word. She knew exactly what she was looking at. "That was an emergency," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, careful. "We were going to pay it back before you ever noticed. 4 accounts, Mom. A personal loan, $23,000. She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped working. "Your brother had an opportunity." She said it like it explained something. "A producer was interested in his demo, but he needed studio time. He needed equipment. You know how long he's been working toward this." "With my name," I said. "With my credit." Without asking me. She looked up then, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not guilt. Calculation. Like she was deciding how much to admit and how much to minimize. "You were approved for things he wasn't," she said. "Your credit was good. You have a steady income. We thought we could manage the payments." I looked at her across that kitchen table, at the woman who had braided my hair every morning in elementary school, who had driven me to every science fair and art show, who had told me 1,000 times that she was proud of me. And I understood, maybe for the first time, that being proud of someone and valuing them are not the same thing. "I want the account numbers," I said. "All of them. And I want to know exactly where every dollar went." She started to say something about keeping things in the family, about how going to the bank would make everything worse, about how my brother was this close to a real breakthrough and if I disrupted things now, it would all fall apart. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone. It was sitting face down on the kitchen table the entire time. I didn't know then that I was going to need that recording. I thought I was just protecting myself. As it turned out, I was doing something much more important. My mother's sister, my Aunt Patricia, was a real estate attorney in Charlotte. She and my mother had a complicated relationship, the kind where two women who grew up in the same house became completely different people and never entirely forgave each other for it. My mother thought Patricia was cold and transactional. Patricia thought my mother was a professional victim who had spent 40 years letting everyone around her absorb the consequences of her choices. They saw each other at Christmas and spoke on birthdays, and that was the extent of it. I called Aunt Patricia from my car in my mother's driveway at 8:30 that night. She picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. "Maya," she said, and her voice was the same as I remembered, direct. No pleasantries, no pretense. "What's wrong?" I told her everything. The pre-approval denial, the credit report, the kitchen conversation, the recording. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and she listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What you're describing is identity theft," she said. "It doesn't matter that it's your mother. It doesn't matter that it's family. What she did is a crime." "I know," I said. My voice cracked a little on those two words. "Not from grief, exactly. From the exhaustion of knowing something you've been trying not to know for a long time." "Do you want to fix it quietly?" Aunt Patricia asked. "Or do you want it fixed correctly?" I thought about my mother's face across the kitchen table, about the calculation in her eyes, about my brother, who I had texted that same night and who had responded with a voice memo, rambling and defensive, telling me I was being dramatic and that this was a family matter that should stay private. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't offered to pay anything back. He had spent 6 minutes explaining to me why I should be more understanding of his artistic process. "I want it fixed correctly," I said. "Okay," said Aunt Patricia. "Come to Charlotte this weekend. Bring everything." I drove to Charlotte on Saturday morning with a folder thick enough to be a doorstop. Aunt Patricia lived in a townhouse in the South End neighborhood, modern and immaculate, with a home office that looked like a law library. She poured us both coffee and sat across from me at her dining room table and went through every document with the focused attention of someone dismantling a machine to understand how it worked. She found things I hadn't found. A second personal loan, applied for 8 months ago, that had gone to collections. A credit card opened the previous spring with a furniture store. Purchases made at an address in Charlotte that matched the recording studio my brother had been using. 2 of the accounts showed my mother's phone number listed as the contact. "This is thorough," Aunt Patricia said, and I couldn't tell if she meant the crime or my documentation, possibly both. "Can it be undone?" I asked. "The credit damage can be disputed and removed," she said. "The accounts were opened fraudulently. That process takes time, but it will work. The money is more complicated." She paused. "Do you know if your brother was aware of how the funding was obtained?" I thought about his voice memo, the careful way he'd said family matter, not denying it, not claiming ignorance, just telling me to be quiet. "He knew," I said. Aunt Patricia nodded like she'd expected that answer. "Then you have 2 options." She folded her hands on the table. 1. You dispute the accounts as fraud. They get closed. Your credit recovers in 6 to 12 months, and your mother and brother face no formal consequences. 2. You file a police report, the fraud investigation proceeds, and depending on what the investigation finds, they could face criminal charges. Identity theft and wire fraud are federal matters if the loans cross state lines, and 2 of these accounts were opened through online lenders registered in different states. The word federal sat between us in the air. I looked out the window at the Charlotte skyline, and thought about something Aunt Patricia had said when I was 16 and going through a rough patch with my mother, something I'd never forgotten. She'd said, "The thing about people who take advantage of kindness is that they only stop when the kindness becomes more expensive than it's worth." "I want to file the report," I said, "but I want to give her a chance first." Aunt Patricia looked at me for a moment. 24 hours? 48, I said. "I want her to understand what's coming." We drafted a letter together that afternoon, Aunt Patricia and I, sitting at her dining room table while the autumn sun moved across the floor. It laid out exactly what had been done, the accounts, the amounts, the collected documentation. It explained the legal exposure clearly and without embellishment. And it made an offer. Close every fraudulent account, provide written acknowledgement of the debt owed to me, and sign a notarized repayment agreement for $23,400 at $300 per month, or we proceed with criminal complaints. My brother's name was on the letter too. I drove back to Raleigh and hand-delivered the letter to my mother's house the next morning. She opened the door in her bathrobe, saw my face, and went very still. "Read it," I said. "Both of you. My brother's car was in the driveway. You have 48 hours. I drove away without going inside. My hands were shaking the whole way home, but it was a different kind of shaking than the night I'd seen the credit report. That night had been shock. This was something else. It felt like the ground solidifying under my feet for the first time in years. The response came in 31 hours. Not from my mother, from my brother. He called me from a number I didn't recognize, which told me he'd anticipated I might not pick up otherwise. He was right. I almost sent it to voicemail. Then I thought about Aunt Patricia saying the thing about kindness becoming expensive, and I answered. He talked for a long time without saying anything. He talked about his music career and the pressure he was under and how close he was to a deal, and how I had always had it easier than him because I was the type of person the world rewarded. I had a good job. I was responsible. Things came naturally to me that he had to fight for. He said the word unfair 3 times in the first 4 minutes. I let him finish. "Are you going to sign the repayment agreement?" I asked. He said he needed more time. He said he needed to talk to a lawyer. He said there was a context to all of this that I wasn't understanding. "You have 17 hours, I said, and ended the call. My mother called 20 minutes later. She was crying. She told me she had made a terrible mistake and that she was sorry. She told me she loved me, and that she had always loved me equally. That what she'd done wasn't about choosing my brother over me. It was about desperation, about watching her son struggling and not knowing what else to do. I listened to her apology with one part of my brain, and with the other part, I was thinking about the Facebook posts. My son is going to make it. He just needs the right opportunity. The posts had likes and heart emojis. They had comments from her church friends. They had a pride in them that I had never seen directed at me. Not once. Not in 30 years of report cards and promotions, and every quiet thing I had built without anyone noticing. "Mom," I said when she paused, "are you going to sign the agreement?" A silence stretched out, and in that silence I heard all the calculations happening, how much she could talk me down, whether I really meant it, whether I would actually go to the police, whether this was one of those moments where I would, as I always had, absorb the damage and smooth things over and let her off the hook. "I'm not backing down," I said quietly. "I want you to understand that clearly. Whatever comes next is your decision, not mine." She asked me to come to the house one more time, just to talk, she said, just to sit down together like a family. I went. I brought Aunt Patricia. My mother had not been expecting that. She opened the door and saw my aunt standing next to me on the porch, and the color left her face so fast it was almost startling. My brother came out of the kitchen when he heard the door. He looked at Aunt Patricia the way people look at something they've underestimated and are now revising their opinion of very quickly. We sat in the living room where I had grown up. The same couch, the same family photos on the wall, my brother's school portraits larger than mine, something I had never let myself consciously register until this moment. Aunt Patricia set her briefcase on the coffee table and laid out the repayment agreement. 2 copies, notarized blanks waiting for signatures. "This is the version that stays private," Aunt Patricia said. Her voice was even and professional, and left no room for the kind of emotional maneuvering my mother was skilled at. "The alternative is a police report filed Monday morning, at which point the matter is no longer in Maya's hands." My mother looked at the papers. She looked at me. "I want to understand what we did to make you like this," she said, so cold. "We're your family." And I thought about every birthday I had spent driving to Charlotte for my brother's gigs that never quite happened. Every holiday conversation that centered on his latest project, his latest setback, his latest explanation for why things hadn't worked out yet but would any day now. Every time I had mentioned something good happening in my life, and watched her nod politely before steering the conversation back to him. The house I wasn't going to be able to buy. The 3 years of weekends I had worked to save for it. "I'm not cold, Mom," I said. "I'm done pretending that what you did to me is something I should absorb quietly and forgive in advance." My brother made one attempt. He said that a formal repayment agreement would ruin his credit. He said it would make it impossible for him to get his own financing for the studio. He said, with genuine indignation, that I was being vindictive. Aunt Patricia looked at him over her reading glasses. Your credit was unaffected because the accounts were opened in your sister's name. That's what we're here to address. He shut up after that. They signed. Both of them. My mother's hand was shaking. My brother signed like he was doing me a favor, his jaw tight, not looking at me. On top of the standard agreement, Aunt Patricia had added one clause I had insisted on myself. Within 7 days, my mother was required to post a public correction on her Facebook page, addressing the recent posts about my brother's recording fund, acknowledging that the funding had been obtained improperly, and that it was being repaid. My brother was required to delete every post that mentioned the album project and the funding behind it. My mother looked at that clause for a long time. Everyone will know, she said finally. Everyone already suspects, Aunt Patricia said mildly. This is your opportunity to get ahead of it. They signed that page too. I didn't feel triumphant walking out to Aunt Patricia's car. I felt the way the air feels after a storm, when the pressure has finally broken and everything is still and clean and a little bit sad. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the house where I had grown up and looked at the magnolia tree in the front yard, the one my dad had planted the year I was born, and I understood that I was not going to be coming back here very often. That's okay, Aunt Patricia said quietly beside me, like she could read my thoughts. It gets easier. The grief part does, anyway. Did it for you? I asked. She and my mother had their own version of this story. I knew. Something that had happened when they were young. Something nobody talked about directly. She considered this for a moment. It did, she said. Eventually, the credit dispute process took 4 months. Aunt Patricia handled most of it, filing the fraud affidavits, submitting documentation to each of the 3 bureaus, following up on the investigations. One by one, the accounts came off my report. The online lender tried to push back initially, claiming they had no way to verify the fraud was genuine, but a certified letter from a real estate attorney in Charlotte tends to clarify things quickly. My brother did not speak to me during those 4 months. My mother called twice. The first time, I answered, and she wanted to talk about whether we could find a way to get back to normal. I asked her what normal she was referring to. She didn't have a good answer. The second time, I let it go to voicemail. She talked for 8 minutes about how families were supposed to forgive each other, and I saved the voicemail in the same folder where I kept the recording from her kitchen. The Facebook correction posted on the 9th day, 2 days past the deadline. Aunt Patricia had already drafted the follow-up letter reminding her of the timeline when it appeared. It was short and clearly written by someone who had been made to write it, but it was there, public and visible, for every church friend and neighbor who had liked those proud posts about my son's music career. Several people commented with confusion, a few with sympathy. One person, someone I didn't know, wrote simply, "Good for her daughter." I took a screenshot and put it in the folder too. By February, my credit score was back. Higher than it had been before, actually, because the dispute process had caught a few old errors I hadn't known about. I called the same lender, reapplied for the pre-approval, and sat at my desk on a Thursday morning, different from that October Tuesday in every way that mattered, and opened my inbox. Application status. Approved. I put my face in my hands and cried for a while. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind where something that has been clenched in your chest for a long time finally lets go. The Craftsman bungalow in Oakwood was no longer available. I'd expected that. I'd mourned it in advance and made my peace with it. Instead, I found a house 2 streets over, a little smaller, with a screened back porch and a kitchen that had been recently updated, and a yard with a persimmon tree and a fig tree growing side by side, like they'd decided to keep each other company. I toured it on a Saturday with Aunt Patricia, who walked through every room, making notes on her phone, checking the inspection report, asking the realtor pointed questions about the foundation and the roof. She caught 2 issues the general inspector had glossed over. Both were negotiated into credits against the purchase price. "You're terrifying," I told her on the way out. She seemed pleased by this. I closed on the house in March. My friend Danielle came to the signing and brought champagne, and we drank it on the screened porch while the late afternoon sun came through the old windows and made everything golden. Aunt Patricia sat in the one chair I'd moved in so far, reading something on her phone, and looked up when I toasted her. "You did this yourself," she said. "You helped," I said. "I provided documentation support," she said. "The doing was all yours." My mother sent me a card when she heard about the closing. Someone from my childhood neighborhood must have told her. The card was the generic congratulations kind from a drugstore, and she had written in it, "I hope you'll be happy there." 3 sentences. No apology, no acknowledgement of anything. But she had sent it. I put it on my refrigerator for a week, and then took it down and put it in a drawer. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. Maybe that was okay. Not everything needed to be resolved immediately. Some things you just carried carefully until you figured out where they belonged. The first payment came from my mother in April. $300, exactly as the agreement specified, deposited to the account Aunt Patricia had set up. My brother's payment came 4 days later, also exactly as agreed. There was no note with either one, no communication, just the money, arriving like a quiet acknowledgement of the shape of things. My brother's album was never finished, as far as I could tell. His Instagram had gone quiet around the time of the Facebook correction. His last post was from 6 months earlier, a photo of a mixing board with a caption about the process being the destination. I looked at it once, and put my phone down and didn't look again. I had repainted the kitchen by then, a deep sage green that I'd been thinking about for years. I'd hung my own artwork on the walls, prints I'd designed myself, pieces I'd always kept in folders because there had never been a wall that felt like mine to put them on. I'd planted herbs along the back fence and was learning, very slowly, how to keep basil alive in a North Carolina summer, which turned out to be harder than it sounded. On a Sunday afternoon in May, I was sitting on the screened porch drinking iced tea and going through some freelance work when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but it was a Charlotte area code, so I answered. It was my brother. He was quiet for a moment after I said hello, like he hadn't fully prepared for me to actually pick up. Then he said my name, just my name, and then he said, "I don't know how to apologize for this. I've been trying to figure out how for months. I don't know if there's a version that's good enough." I didn't say anything. I let the silence do its work. "I knew what Mom was doing," he said. "Not the exact amounts, not all of it, but I knew she was opening accounts. I told myself it was between the two of you, that it wasn't my business. That was wrong. I was wrong." He said the last part slowly, like the words were unfamiliar in his mouth. "I cost you your house, not just money, the house you'd been saving for. That was real, and I helped take it." I looked out at the persimmon tree and the fig tree in my yard, growing side by side. "I have a different house now," I said. "Yeah." He cleared his throat. "I heard it was nice." "It is," I said. Another silence. Then, "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking you to come back to family dinners or act like things are normal. I just needed you to know that I know what I did, and that I'm paying it back. Not because Patricia made me sign something, because it's yours and I took it and I want to give it back." I thought about what Aunt Patricia had told me once, that the difference between an apology and accountability is what comes after the word stop. My brother was still making his monthly payments. He had gotten a job, I'd heard through my mother's neighbor, managing inventory at a music retailer. Not glamorous, not a recording studio, just a job. "I hear you," I said finally. "That matters. I don't know what comes next between us, but I hear you." He said okay. He said thank you for answering. He got off the phone before it could become something more loaded than either of us was ready for. I sat on the porch for a long time after that, listening to the evening settle around the neighborhood, the distant sound of someone's lawnmower, a dog barking 2 streets over, the particular piece of a place that belongs to you. There was a day, not long after all of it started, when a coworker had asked me how I was doing and I'd said fine, the way you do, and she'd tilted her head and said, "You don't look fine." And I had realized that what I'd been carrying for so many years was so heavy that the weight of it had become the baseline, the thing I thought was normal, the price I thought everyone paid for belonging to a family. I didn't think that anymore. Aunt Patricia came to Raleigh in June for a conference and stopped by for dinner on a Thursday evening. I made the pasta my grandmother used to make, the one nobody else in the family had ever bothered to learn, and we sat at my kitchen table with the sage green walls and the prints I'd hung myself, and she told me about a case she was working on and I told her about a brand identity project that had been shortlisted for a regional design award, and it was so ordinary and so good. At the end of the night, standing on my front porch watching her back out of the driveway, I thought about what I would have said a year ago if someone had told me this was coming. The house, the award, the porch, the dinner with the aunt I barely knew who had turned out to be one of the most important people in my life. I would not have believed it. I had been too accustomed to the idea that good things happened at someone else's expense, that there was only so much room at the table and I was not the one who got to sit down. It turned out that wasn't true. It had never been true. I had just been standing outside a different table all along, waiting for an invitation to one I could have simply walked away from years earlier. The design award came through in August. Regional silver, which was the kind of thing that sounds modest until you see the list of agencies that entered and understand what it actually means. My creative director sent it to the whole agency in a Monday morning email. My name was first. Not the agency's name, not the client's name. Mine. I screenshot it. I sent it to Aunt Patricia with no caption. She sent back a single line. I told you. She had, in fact, never told me anything of the sort. But I didn't argue. I saved the message in the folder with everything else. Not the folder I'd built for evidence and documentation, the one that had done its necessary work and was now just an archive. A different folder. One I'd made recently entitled, without being clever about it, Mine. That folder was going to need more room. I was planning on filling it,